Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
David Greig is a leading Scottish playwright, as well as artistic director of the Royal Lyceum Theatre, one of the main producing theatres in Edinburgh. His dramatic works have ranged in scale from fringe and studio productions to a West End musical, including an adaptation in 2016 of The Suppliant Women, the only fully extant play in a trilogy by Aeschylus from the 5th century BCE. Not content to stop there, he is also adapting the other two plays in the trilogy, even though only fragments of the originals still exist, the first of which, The Egyptians, opens at Gulbenkian Arts Centre in Canterbury, Kent, at the end of February 2023. I spoke to David a couple of weeks before The Egyptians opened, and I asked him to fill us in on the story so far of what happened before the start of the new play.
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is it a new play? Because the second play and third play of the trilogy of which Suppliant Women is part are lost, except for one word in the case of the second play. The word is Zagreus, which is the name of a god of death. And that word is in a dictionary, a Byzantine dictionary. And then in play 3, there are 2 or 3 longer, but still fragments that come from books of quotation. So we don't know what play 2 and play 3 originally were, but we set out, the team who were making the project and myself, we set out to recreate as best we could what we thought those plays might be. So the second play, The Egyptians, is our attempt to do the really insane thing of trying to recreate something from only one word. But the original play, Suppliant Women, exists. We know it's part of a trilogy that Aeschylus wrote. We know that we know the year it was performed pretty much. We know many, many things about it. Suppliant Women concerns the story of the Danaids. The Danaids are 50 women from Egypt, daughters of a king called Danaos. And they are escaping from marriage to their cousins, the sons of Aegyptos, therefore the Egyptians, of the title of the second play. And they arrive in the Greek ancient city of Argos, and they ask the king to take them in effect to give them asylum in the name of Zeus. So these women arrive with their father and say, take us in. And the city has to decide whether to do that or not. And they have a number of arguments why they should be taken in. One is that Zeus would demand it because they are suppliants and they should be protected. And the other is that they are in fact related to the people of Argos because their great-great-great-grandmother was a mortal woman called Io who had sex with Zeus or was assaulted by Zeus. The Greeks are very...
who wasn't in, really?
Quite ambivalent on these issues. But either way, they are related via Zeus and Io to the people of Argos. So those are the two arguments. And given those arguments, the people of Argos vote to take the women in. And that is the end of play 1. Now, what we know the myth of the Danaids, we know its broad outline. And we know that Aeschylus discusses it in another play, so we know a little bit about how he sees it. What Egyptians does is play 2, and we know that the chorus are the sons of Aegyptos, because that's the title, and that's how Greek plays work. So the sons of Aegyptos arrive in pursuit of their women at the gates of Argos. And we begin with the defeat of the Argive king and his death on the battlefield, and the sons of Aegyptos approach the city saying, now you can give us our women back. And the mother of the king comes out, and that would be the beginning of our play.
Right. I saw The Suppliant Women at the Royal Exchange in Manchester in 2017, and what I particularly liked about it was how they didn't look like they'd just stepped off a Greek vase. This was trying to give a modern audience the same sort of experience. So we had I think he was the chair of the of the theatre stepped out and gave a speech. All of the chorus were amateurs; they were unpaid,
Yes.
and we didn't have many professional actors. Well, I think there were 3 professional actors, which is probably 2 more than Aeschylus would have had. But oh no,
No, we exactly mimic.
Did you? Right.
It's what he would have. Yeah. The interesting thing is they would never be on stage at the same time.
Right.
You can never have 3. You can't have a scene with 3.
Right.
But what you can have is there was a professional actor who was the chorus leader.
Ah, yeah.
So we had 2 professional actors and the chorus leader. Actually, it seems that Aeschylus might have been the chorus leader himself. And if you bear in mind that he would also have written the music, done the choreography and the play and directed it, and probably done the costumes, you can see he was a busy man. But anyway, yeah, there's 2 actors, and of course the actors can play different roles because it's masked, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you can have more characters, but you can only have 2 actors. And the chorus parameter, you're quite right, the chorus parameter.
Yeah. It makes modern playwrights sound a bit lazier, even when you put it like that, doesn't it? But so you've not recreated it to that extent, but you have tried to recreate some sort of experience for a modern audience, and it was sort of put in. It's fairly wordy into these sorts of plays, in that they're putting across a political argument, which sort of seemed relevant at the time in 2016, 2017 as well, didn't it?
Well, look, here's the thing. We set ourselves with Suppliant Women. We met this quite mysterious play and we just dug into it. And we discovered that the more we treated it as its own object, an ancient Greek object, the more interesting it was to us.
Yeah.
That meant remembering it, that it was foreign. We had to remember that this play is very distant from us in time and place. And so we just thought, let's try and learn what we can. So we did, for example, it's written in rhythm because it originally would be in rhythm, spoken with a rhythmic beat that is not natural to us, kind of thing. We put music to the odes, the choral odes are sung. We tried to recreate some of the conditions of production. But the big thing you've said about it being relevant, like on the one hand, it absolutely was relevant. What could be more relevant than fleeing women arriving on a beach and saying, please give us asylum, and then the democratic city having to wonder what, the pros and cons of this and talk it through, was really, really brilliant. But what we've really tried to do is let the play be the play. So in Suppliant Women, and the other thing is Suppliant Women's been known for a while, but people forget it's part of the trilogy. So it ends with the women being taken in. And they say equal power to the women. And that's pretty much the original. I mean, they get taken in and they say this thing. They're really saying to Zeus, like, we are equal in the eyes of Zeus. So anyway, the point is, it's not that crazy a translation. But what everyone forgets is that what we know from the myth is that Argos is defeated in the next play. Yeah. And that the Egyptians arrive and they've killed the king. So this is... So, there's a little bit, it would be too, I suppose what I mean is we, of course, want the play to speak to us clearly today and offer a feminist message, for example. But that's not quite the case. The first play offers a feminist message, but the next play would offer a different set of arguments. So I suppose what I mean is I found it really attractive and interesting that these plays teach us something, but part of what they teach us is not like, we're not in control of it. It's not clear that it doesn't map onto our own politics of today, but it reflects it. And maybe that's what, by looking at this, we can think about ourselves in an interesting way.
Yeah, and it sort of follows Greek debating ideas of, the three, the group of 3, the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, doesn't it?
That is absolutely, the whole play is constructed by that. Aeschylus is as much an educator as he is a playwright. That is understood to be part of the job. The reason it's a chorus of amateur young men is that these men are going to be the citizens of Athens. They have to be trained. They have to be trained in thinking just as much as in war, which, of course, they would all fight. They would all be expected ultimately to fight. The audience who watched it would be men who were citizens and also would have fought in battles. All of them would have fought almost certainly. So there's something about that thesis, antithesis, synthesis is all the way through the play, and all the way through Greek theatre is balance. Balance is the thing. So the women who refuse to get married, this is extreme. As far as the Greeks can, this is extreme. It's not, on the other hand, the men who are not interested in the consent of the women, that is also extreme. But that doesn't mean that the Greeks are, I strongly believe the likely outcome of the play is that, well, we know, in fact, the outcome of the play is that the women murder the men on the marriage night, but one woman and one man don't. So one woman does not murder, and the implication is that one man does not unwillingly, disrespect or force his wife. So therefore, the Greeks are saying that they are descended from the not murderer and the not rapist, but the extremes have to either be murdered or then be punished by some other form. So I guess what I mean is our Christian and even sort of modern ideas of redemption, or this is not what Aeschylus is dealing with. He's dealing with balance, thesis, antithesis, trophy, apostrophe, all of that stuff, which is why I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell, even just from the press release, that there's some remarkable scholarship has gone in.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been working on it for 6 years.
Yeah.
And we've spoken to every expert, certainly every English-speaking expert we can find. We've read enormous amounts of books. We've been to Greece, to Uganda, to Egypt to look at some of the forms of dance that came from there that we can look at. And, we've researched Aeschylus because we have to get sort of mind meld with him. But we also researched the conditions of Greek theatre. We researched Egyptian history. Just the whole lot. Yeah. It's crazy. But, I mean, it's a stupid idea. It's an insane idea. I don't even know. And that's, for me, the central part of this is that we wanted to do something so preposterous that by doing it, something interesting would have to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what we've done. So when you said at the beginning it's a new play, well, of course, it is. But on the other hand, genuinely, I have written it as if I've been working off a literal translation of an original play that has recently been rediscovered.
Yes.
And then I'm trying to translate it to make it, audible to a modern audience.
Yeah, from one word and a lot of speculation, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the music as well, using music. I mean, nobody's ever heard, not for 2,000 years, ancient Greek music, but it's amazing how some scholars have managed to piece together what it might have sounded like, isn't it?
Right, and we were very lucky to work with a project that was recreating the music and the form of the aulos. The aulos was the bone flute created from the bone, one of the bones of a deer, one of the leg bones of a deer. And we know that the aulos accompanied all of these plays. So, and what it's most like is a bagpipe, actually. So there's 2 flutes. So the player has 2 flutes in his mouth, and he has a continual blowing system using his breath, a bit like we have a bagpipe with a bag doing a drone, and then another doing the melody. And that's, we had Barnaby, who's the most extraordinary, Barnaby and Bennett, these 2 Cambridge musical academics who have recreated these instruments. And and John Brown composes the music. And of course, he's doing a job a bit like me. He's composing his own music, but he's also trying as much as he can to learn from what we do. Yeah,
I don't think there's even any music written down in any form, is there, from that time? No. So where do you start with that?
Well, this is where it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like practical archaeology in the sense that academics can only do so much. There's a point at which, if you want to recreate the boat that might have crossed the Pacific, like Tor Heyerdahl did, or if you want to rebuild an Iron Age house, at some point you've got to get a builder in, and the builder will say, well, okay, if you've got this material, I would suggest doing it this way. And that's often a way that you can actually get quite close to how things might have been. And that's what I felt, is that the academics can do a lot of work, but as a playwright, I can bring a kind of practical knowledge to bear. And I think it's the same with John. If you have an aulos, if it has to do chorus, if you have only these notes available, if you have to work with rhythm, this is what I would do, and in a way that's its own magic, is bringing yourself to it.
Yeah, I suppose the intentions are similar to the original intentions of Shakespeare's Globe, trying to find out what the original situation would tell you about the play is.
Yeah, what do you learn from it? Yeah. And part of that is the assumption that whatever Aeschylus was, he had a brain exactly like ours, and and so we put our brain to the conditions that he faced and see what comes up. But again, there's a second thing, is we're not under any illusion that, how theatre is suspended disbelief.
Yeah.
So I profoundly am operating as if this were discovered one day in a library somewhere or under a pile of manuscripts, I would love to feel that it would be exactly word for word what I did. I know, of course, that's not true. And I also know in a way that whatever we do is somehow about now as much as it's about 2,500 years ago.
Yeah.
But the only way we get it to be about now is by 100% committing to 2,500 years ago. The moment we stop pretending, everything will fall apart. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We have to totally commit to it, and then just hope that says something interesting about the modern world. But I think if the moment we tried to adapt it and say, hey, they could really be talking about this, then whatever is interesting about it stops being interesting. So the pretense is the game of it, really.
Yeah, I mean, that was what I felt about the Suppliant Women. It did say a lot about what was going on in the world at that time, but it didn't actually say, look, this is like what's happening in Europe. It didn't have to do that, did it?
And also, I do think, the very helpful thing about something that's 2,500 years old is that we can all look at it, and we can all, it's not polarizing, because we can look at this object, and it's perfectly possible because, you're talking about Manchester in 2016. Well, clearly in the north of England at that time, people's feelings about different types of immigration were not as clear cut as perhaps, they would be in a liberal theatre-going establishment in London. But here was a chance where some of what was said would be things that would make people like me happy, and some of what was said in that play would be things that would challenge someone like me and might be of interest to someone who's, saying, actually, we've got to be careful about who we take into a democracy and who we don't. And I like the fact that the play's foreignness and its foreignness in time allowed it to be a place where we could come together and talk, not as like, oh, this play proves my point.
Yeah.
Doesn't prove my point, doesn't prove your point. It just gives us a ground on which to talk. And I hope that's true of Egyptians. I really hope that's part of what it does.
Yeah, it gives a sort of a Brechtian distance in a sense, doesn't it? So you can look at it in a safe way, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And it's also dangerous because, Egyptians, the more we've studied it, the more we feel that a great deal of what it's probably about is masculinity, and in particular the male sense of right over women. And the brilliant thing about it is that on the one hand, the Greeks are saying this is too extreme. You've got to be, you need the consent of women, and but actually they're not saying, for example, they're not interested in love. They're not marriage is a contract.
Yeah.
And they're not interested in women choosing their own husbands per se. They're just interested in family harmony, and that. So I suppose it's another one of those things where it's dangerous because you're writing stuff. Sometimes you're writing stuff where you feel comfortable, where the male entitlement is being, is obviously bad. And then other times you have to find yourself with speeches. We've given a big speech to a priestess of Hera. Hera is the goddess of marriage. And she is famously constantly arguing with Zeus and quarreling with him because he constantly has sex outside marriage. But interestingly, she's not like she's not sort of pro-women per se, she's pro-marriage. So her thing, these women are equally absurd and not, anyway, it's just I guess what I mean is there's a conservatism in one side and actually quite a radical idea in the other side, and they're both present. And that feels sometimes quite dangerous to write because, it's not how I personally would speak today, but, I hope it's interesting and they're characters.
Yeah, you've got to, if you're not writing a polemic, which usually you just preaching to the converted, isn't it? Then you've got to construct the argument of the people you disagree with in a realistic way, haven't you?
And that's what the Greeks are great at. Your thesis is absolutely right. So the boys come and they say, we're going to get these women, they belong to us. The mother says, we've made a promise to Zeus, it cannot be broken. And then the priestess of Hera is saying, actually, there is a way around this through marriage. And I hope that people come and see it to find out how that resolves itself. Well, actually, no, you can read the myth. Suffice to say, marriage is agreed, and then the women murder the men. So, but that's not in this play. They murder the men at the beginning of the next one.
Right.
But, again, like the Greeks would know that. It's like Little Red Riding Hood. This is play 2 of Little Red Riding Hood. You know that, the wolf isn't going to, survive, but you have to see how we tell the story, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I suppose it's Brecht, and it's not the ending; it's how you get there, isn't it? But it's it's a pity that sort of method isn't being brought to public disputes at the moment, really, isn't it?
Mate, I totally agree. I mean, I'm obsessed with it now. I really, really like the Greek approaches. So, a lot of people don't know, you probably do, but the Greek theatre, the Greek tragic theatre arrives at exactly the same time as democracy. So in literally the same years that these plays are being written is the beginning of democracy in Athens. And we don't know what party Aeschylus was part of. I mean, he could have been anti-democratic. It's because of what he writes and because of his friendship with one of the generals, we can assume that he was probably relatively pro-democratic. But the point is, these plays were performed to the citizens, and they were ways of discussing this is what I love about the Greeks, is to be a citizen, as far as they're concerned, you need to have a schooling in thinking, a schooling in speaking, a schooling in, and theatre is a schooling in imagining your way through problems. What is it like to occupy another person's shoes? And that is very important in a democracy. Now, brackets, only men, only rich men, not women or slaves, so. But again, that's another thing we have to get our head around. Imagine people who can be so empathetic as Aeschylus is in play 1 when he imagines the women. And the speeches he gives those women are so beautiful and empathetic. And yet he's a person who I would be incredibly doubtful spent any of his time thinking that his wife should have a vote or that his slaves should have a vote. And I'm almost certain he had slaves. He was a wealthy Athenian. So that's really hard for us to get our heads around because we are we're Christian, post-socialism, post-human rights. And I just think that's really brilliant to encounter humans who are not us. Yeah. I really do.
Yeah, it seems contradictory to us, but it wouldn't do. We probably seem a massive contradiction to them. You've been working with the Gulbenkian on this, and I spoke to David Chadderton actually last July, and he was talking about it then. I'm assuming it's moved on quite a lot since then. So, what is your partnership with the Gulbenkian?
Oh, he's been wonderful. David Chadderton's shown such faith in it. So we're doing play 2. We have a chorus from Kent. We also have a chorus from London South Bank University. This time it's a male chorus. So Suppliant Women was a chorus of women, and the characters were male. So in a strophe, antistrophe way, the Egyptians is a play with a chorus of men. We knew that was the case. So we've tried to make it a play where the characters are women. And Aeschylus wrote some extraordinary women, if you think about, for example, Clytemnestra. So why would he not have written some extraordinary women here? So we've given us as good an account as we can and created two female characters who are at the centre of this play. Anyway, David Chadderton has agreed with us that we will do this play, and then he will support us to do the third play as well. And eventually at the Gulbenkian, we'll do all three.
Right. And that's, it was a few years since you did the first one. So is this a reduced timescale between 2 and 3?
Yeah, I very much hope so. I hope we can do it within a year.
Yeah.
Also, it does get easier. Play 2 was always going to be the hardest because we were spinning out invention and we had to learn how to do it. But it's not that we've learned everything by any means, but we don't have to learn all that again. We've already learned a lot, but we've also learned a lot about doing our own, So in a way, play 3 is a continuation of work that we're already doing. So I hope that we'll do that much more quickly.
Yeah, and you've got all the academic contacts and everything now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also, as anyone will know who's written a play, there's a certain point at which everything answers its own question, because you know now, oh, right, hang on, if he says that, then this means that, and that will end up being this, and so it has to end that way, whereas, at the beginning, anything is possible. Well, now, much, much less is possible because we've written play 2, so hopefully the road actually starts to dictate its own, direction.
Yeah. Now, you took over there at the Lyceum in 2016, was it?
No, it was actually 2015, but yeah.
Which, a playwright in charge of a major theatre, isn't that common unless it's somebody like, John Godber or Alan Ayckbourn who are putting on their own plays. I was talking to Mark Ravenhill about this a couple of years ago when he took over at the King's Head. But you haven't been promoting your own work particularly. You've still kept the two things apart. How has it been for you the last 6 years or 7 years?
Well,
because you've still been quite active as a playwright as well, haven't you?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few different things. Well, the first is the last few years has been a pretty horrible time to run a theatre, frankly, for anybody, whether playwright or director. And Scotland is in a peculiar position. We were trying to stabilise and get our theatre managing to survive these very difficult times. And that was even really true before I took the Lyceum on. I mean, the Lyceum needed to change in order to survive, and I wanted to try and make that change happen. I have put Local Hero on and Touching the Void and things like that. But I've been very conscious that it feels like vanity publishing to put your own play on. And so what I've made a rule for myself is I would only put my play on if it was a co-production with another theatre and the other theatre was providing the director and was programming the play, so that I could know in my bones that this is a play that deserved to go on, and that I was using the partnership to help my theatre. So I've tried to only program my own work where it brings partnership. So that's the Solaris with the Malthouse in Melbourne, Touching the Void with Bristol, Old Vic, and so on. Yeah, it's odd. I don't know. I can't explain it. It's certainly not. It was never part of my aim that running the theatre was a way of putting my plays on. It was always, I just was interested in running the theatre. And I guess as times have got tight in Scotland, I've been more and more aware that there's not a lot of opportunity here to get plays on. So every time I program anything that's by me, I feel pretty guilty about it unless I can point to a strong financial reason why it's bringing benefit to the theatre.
It's I would imagine it's not something that a lot of playwrights aspire to run a theatre. It's quite a big step, isn't it? So why did you want to do that?
I've always had a couple of sides to my life. I've done directing, but also I was part of the Suspect Culture Theatre Company. I've also been quite involved in administrative and political stuff around Scottish theatre. Independence movement, I was quite involved. So I've always had a side which is not just playwriting, but wanting to do stuff. And I think I had this feeling of I had reached, my late 40s, and I thought I was really fed up of hearing myself say, do you know what they should do? Do you know they should do this? Why have they done that? They should do this. I thought, well, just put your money where your mouth is now. Do it then and see. And in fact, it's been a very salutary lesson because there is no one so hemmed in as the leader of a theatre, as an artist. That thing of like, why don't they do this? I can always guarantee you they've thought about it and there's a good reason. So there is that level where I just wanted to take some responsibility and try and do my best to make what I really believed was possible out of the Lyceum, which is a place where the work can have long life and is of interesting quality. I've been fighting against a tide of funding cuts and pandemics and financial crisis, so I'm not sure of it. Sadly, I wish we were ending up producing more than when I started. I suspect that when I go, we'll be producing less, but I hope we'll still be producing more than we would otherwise have been producing.
Yeah. And Scottish theatre always seemed to me a smaller, friendlier community than English theatre. Everybody seems to know each other. I know you've worked with Elizabeth Newman at Pitlochry, who I know from when she was at Bolton down here. Is that true, or is it just how it looks from the outside?
No, it's both true and not true. I mean, we're a smaller, self-contained community, and there's things about that are terrific and things that are bad. So the terrific things are that people do know each other, they work together very often, and also people know each other in different ways. So directors know writers, writers know choreographers, choreographers know actors, and in fact, we also know other, we know the television makers and the artists and the musicians, because we're just a small country with only really 2 cities acting as full hubs of making and living. And so you just do know people, and that can be really great. And we can be very mutually supportive. The negative is it's a small pond, and there is a kind of parochialism. There's also the issues around we're not very well funded certainly compared to London, and even I would argue compared to Manchester. It's pros and cons is all I would say, pros and cons. But, I'm very proud of the fact that it's in the British Islands, it's still probably the most vibrant community of making outside London. I think we might lose that now to Ireland, but anyway, that's our own fault. It's not, I mean our own as in Scotland's fault for not supporting.
Yeah. There seems to be a stronger link between theatre and politics, I think, in Scotland as well. Theatre seems to react more quickly to political change. I know you were very active with the referendum campaign for Scottish independence. I saw some of your events at the book festival that year. Is that true?
Again, I think historically there is a connection with the independence devolution campaigns in the 80s, independence campaigns, poll tax, coal mining, all of these things. Yep, 784 is one of our, contemporary founding theatre institutions, founded by a man from Liverpool, of course, as we often forget. But there is a strong political strand in Scottish theatre, definitely. Very, very associated with nationalism, but that's kind of inevitable, isn't it? Because what is a culture? Why should you be independent? Well, you say, well, okay, geographically this place should be governed, but you might also say we are a people, we are a culture. Well, what does that mean? Because if you're not talking about blood and soil, which we're not, then it can only be tradition, creativity, art, a mindset, an attitude, and so on. So, culture has to be at the centre of that debate in a way. Yeah. I would also argue it has to challenge it, and increasingly, I kind of feel like it's important that culture is not assumed to be taking positions, because I do think, it's important that we have to be as much a thorn in the side as a supporter.
Yeah. We heard this week, I think it was, that Nick Barley was stepping down from the book festival, and the Lyceum has been quite heavily involved in your time with the book festival, hasn't it? With the
Playing with Books.
Playing with Books, that's right. Yeah, I've seen a few of those. Do you want to just explain what that is and why you got involved with it?
Yeah, well, that was an idea that was cooked up by the book festival and ourselves, and really what we do is every year we give 3 playwrights, directors, actors, musicians a book to play with for a week, and then on the Saturday they perform a kind of scratch performance of the book as an adaptation at the book festival. in front of the living author of the book, who then goes on stage, and the discussion between the audience and the living author and the playwrights and actors and so on. And it's been we've done, I think, 12 of them in total. Some of them have gone on to ultimately be made as plays, although none have yet seen light of day because boring reasons, but they will get there, and there will be a legacy. Great fun, and the authors of the books really enjoy it, and the audience love it because they tend to know the book and they're interested in the adaptation. In fact, one did come to fruition. This is Memorial Device, which is a Scottish novel about a kind of fictional punk scene in Airdrie in the 1980s, and we did that as a one-man show with Paul Higgins last year. But no, I just love it. I really love it, and it's been such a great R&D for us. Sadly, the book festival, like us, face very bad funding situation. So this year it's not going to happen. And Nick is also going. So we'll just have to see if it ever comes back. But it certainly has been an extraordinary bunch of stuff we've done, and some great, hopefully some plays for the future. I think there's a future for the adaptation of The Outrun by Amy Littrop. I think there's a future for His Bloody Project, which is a great novel about murder mystery. And what else have we got? How to Be Both by Ali Smith, still being developed. So there's things coming through which I hope will see the light of day.
Yeah, I've been in the audience for those. I've watched a few of them, and you feel like you're in at the start of something. You feel like you're sort of helping it in a sense.
I realised that there is another one that came to fruition, albeit at Pitlochry, because we did Charlotte Higgins' sort of book about Roman Britain, a memoir of, well, it wasn't a memoir. She actually wrote a book about Roman Britain, but we kind of adapted it into a sort of memoir about two people in a camper van exploring Roman ruins and falling in love. So that was nice. And we did that at Pitlochry last summer.
Yeah, I think she was quite shocked to find herself as a character in it as well, wasn't she? But Memorial Device, I saw that last year, and that was an amazing performance by Paul Higgins, wasn't it? And it was set in, I suppose it was sort of my era and yours as well, because we're about the same age.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, look, it's a play for. I called it Crap's Last Mixtape. It's a play about people who remember the 80s. And there's a certain sort of bloke in a band T-shirt. Not only blokes, no. Important to say. There are women who also wear band T-shirts and remember. But yeah, it certainly hit that demographic.
You're also very active on Twitter. I haven't been seeing much on Twitter recently because they keep blocking all the ways that I like to read it. But are you still posting your witty little tweets?
You're very, very kind to call it witty. I think the sort of... Actually, what I find is that when I get stressed, one way that my mind works under pressure is it sort of loosens itself from language, so that instead of language being a sort of source of meaning, it's like language becomes these sort of words and patterns and objects and sounds, which is a really great way that you find puns. So it's almost as if your mind is sort of broken by whatever is distracting it. And so you just sort of see shapes instead of seeing words. And so often when I'm punning or doing jokes, it's actually a sign that I'm under stress. It's just things are going wrong at the theatre. And I love Twitter for its... I feel I'm drifting because it's so... it's just not very good anymore. And one thing which is a bit sad is I've really noticed that if I tweet something that is angry and political, that is now immediately getting really a lot of views and coverage. Whereas if I tweet things like I used to, which are sort of funny little poems or jokes or ideas, I'm just getting nothing for it, like no views. And I'm sure that's not because the people who were previously interested are no longer interested. I think it's just because the algorithm now is just really ramped up on conflict. So, for example, I am very, very angry about the way that the head of the BBC is essentially implicated in having bought his position through offering financial assistance to Boris Johnson. I think that's disgusting. So I tweeted about that, and that gets 150,000 views and many, many retweets. My funny little joke about something, or even my sort of gentle opinion about something, is, gets 1,000 views. And once the algorithms like that, it stops. When it was a simple idea that you just put stuff in front of the people who followed you and they could choose to look at it or not, it was so beautiful an idea. But now I think it's something else. So I don't know if I will be for long, but thank you for saying that you enjoyed that. That means a lot.
Oh, finally, then, you've always got plenty of things opening. Apart from the Egyptians, you've actually got another opening tonight, haven't you?
Oh, well, it's not my play, but it's Zinnie Harris's play, Macbeth, is opening in our theatre tonight. It's actually called Macbeth, An Undoing. And it's not dissimilar in some ways to the Egyptians. It is, it's a new play that spins from Macbeth, but it's really exploring the play from Lady Macbeth's point of view. But it is this strange and interesting hybrid of Zinnie Harris and Shakespeare, where it's quite hard to see the joins sometimes. There's lines where I go, hang on a minute, did Shakespeare say that, or is that Zinnie? And I can't be sure. I think it's great. I think it's really exciting. I'm very much hoping people like it. It's a big, meaty slab of theatre that we've really been missing, I think.
That was David Greig, whose adaptation of The Egyptians by Aeschylus will have an initial run at Gulbenkian Arts Centre in Canterbury from the 22nd to the 25th of February 2023. See www.thegulbenkian.co.uk for more details. Macbeth An Undoing by Zinnie Harris after Shakespeare runs at the Royal Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh also until the 25th of February. For more information, see lyceum.org.uk.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.